Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you for tuning into the program today. The opioid epidemic is now triggering action from doctors and federal lawmakers alike. Now, just recently, for the first time ever, the FDA requested that a drug company pull a certain painkiller off the market due to its potential for abuse. Our guest today is founding member and chief executive officer of Prescient Medical, Dr. Keri Donaldson. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Donaldson.
Hey, Neal. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks for taking the time for us today. Now, we've heard the epidemic of opioid use. We've heard how certain pockets of the country seem to be inundated with overdoses and deaths and all sorts of things. Why has this been labeled an opioid crisis other than the obvious?
Well, Neal, I think the first thing when we're talking about opioid crisis or epidemic in America right now that we have to focus on, just to set the playing field, is really the scope or magnitude of what's occurring. So in 2015, 55,000 Americans died of drug-related overdoses, including opioids in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So to scope that so it's consumable or that people can understand it, I think it's important to associate that with other mass casualty events like 9/11. Mm-hmm. So in 9/11, we lost around 3,000 Americans. The scale of what we're talking about in terms of opioid epidemic or dependency and crisis equates to a 9/11 happening every month, 1 to 2 times a month, all year long, every year. Wow. And it's getting worse. The other way to think about that is the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War took 20 years to rack up about 55,000 casualties. We're seeing that every single year. And again, it's getting worse with this opioid epidemic. So I think it's very sobering to understand before we get into the rest of this, just the sheer magnitude of the effect that this is having on everyone's lives.
Now, you're a part of a very diverse cross-section of experts that have convened or will be convening in Philadelphia, the first annual Solving the Opioid Crisis Summit. You're going to be there to discuss solutions to this problem. How do we start solving this problem?
Yeah, so Neal, that's exactly what brings us together. And the numbers that we just talked about, again, are very sobering and impactful, but they're well known. Everybody talks about this opioid crisis. Mm-hmm. Really, what we're in the room to do is solve it. And we've been working on that over the last year or so. And this summit is a culmination of those events where we talk about a comprehensive solution, or really a set of comprehensive solutions to stem the flow or ebb the flow of what's happening here. And it goes from everything from appropriate agent selection at the beginning through appropriate detox selection and also monitoring at the end. And what do I mean by that? Well, everybody has a seat at the table here, whether it's the payer, the patient, the insurer, which we call about payer, mm-hmm. or things like pharmacy that you may not realize. Everybody has a seat at the table here, and we really talk about comprehensive solutions. And what would that be, given that I just talked about the 4 different groups that are involved? Well, the first solution that people may not realize is, what about a patient that is going to be given a drug, and if you knew they would have a high likelihood of developing dependency on that opioid, which then would lead, as it does in 4 out of 5 or 80% of the time, in patients that are addicted to heroin start on opioid pain pills. Wouldn't it be nice if you could tell before you give the drug if they have a high likelihood of dependency? And that's the first solution that we have really to address that, is avoidance if possible. And then we have 4 other solutions that comprehensively look at this. And again, it's world experts in these fields. We're all here. We put these solutions together. And this symposium is really there to communicate those solutions to the population as a whole.
You mentioned, everyone being at the table. How would you describe the financial burden of this epidemic on the United States as far as, everybody being at the table? Not everyone is dependent on these drugs. Not everyone is suffering from their effects. Many are paying for health care or rehab or needle exchanges and all sorts of things. What about the financial burden?
So the financial burden is significant and getting worse. It's estimated just hospitalization costs alone are at anywhere in the order of magnitude of $50 to $80 billion a year in the U.S. across the country. If you add in some societal costs like incarceration, like drug courts, which we're also very active in. That number is really 3 to 4 times that. And what I would say is, even though people don't perceive as they're paying for this, they're paying for it. And trust me, payers, meaning health insurers, are acutely aware of this. Government officials are acutely aware of this. Providers, meaning prescribing physicians and or practitioners, are acutely aware of this. And I think patients are becoming increasingly aware of their ability to assess whether they're going to develop dependency or not.
On the other side of the financial coin, not only paying through the nose for this epidemic, what about the financial situation that exists that allows extremely poor areas to be the hardest hit when it comes to prescription drug use and abuse?
Neal, that's a very good question. And really what you see is we say that this crosses all socioeconomic lines, which it really does, meaning that everybody unfortunately has access to these medications and thereby the abuse if they have a likelihood of developing dependency. But the areas that you seem or that we perceive as hardest hit are really those that are underserved. Appalachia, Middle America, inner cities, and increasingly, strangely enough, suburban America is also hit. So those areas have the high incidences, everybody does, the high likelihood of developing dependency. It's just they don't have the resource to appropriately address it, like rescue shots, like, ambulances that pick people up and get them to the hospital. So that's why it increases the felt burden in those underserved areas.
Now, being that unless you're involved in illegal activity, you can't get these drugs without a prescription written by some healthcare provider. How do you get through to our healthcare providers that even though the numbers are well known, the financial burden is well known, the risks are well known, why are these prescriptions continuing to be written in such high numbers to many people that don't have these prescriptions coming to them?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, too. And in reality, what we've had success with is engaging prescribers or providers is part of the solution here. And 7 states across the U.S. have limited first-time prescriptions to 7 days or less. 10 states across the U.S. have limited first-time prescriptions to 7 days or less. That's part of a solution. Statewide tracking programs in terms of how often people are being prescribed these medications or how often a prescriber is prescribing these to patients are in place right now. And this really forms a sort of a comprehensive dialogue, and you engage the prescriber so they understand they're part of the solution, not part of the problem. It's all approach.
And where can our listeners go online and get some more information about this summit and about the opioid epidemic and how they can get involved with solving the problem themselves?
Well, Neal, thank you so much. You can visit us at prescientmedicine.com, PRESCIENT, medicine.com, and we'll have all the information from the summit posted there, as well as video screen caps and things. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Dr. Keri Donaldson, as a medical director and CEO of Prescient Medicine. He's joined us here on Health Professional Radio to talk about the growing opioid epidemic in the United States. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, listen in, and download at SoundCloud.